It's been about 6 months since my last game jam, and I love doing game jams. Making a small game in a few months is just really fun to do. So I was kind of disappointed when I ended up missing most of the big jams this year. This meant that when my friend Aikoso announced the Geo Jam, I couldn't help but enter. The jam was starting on a Friday and lasting for a week. The issue is that I have school during the weekdays, meaning I would only really be able to work on the game during the weekend and a few hours on Friday night. Anyway, I managed to get to my desk at 8 PM on Friday just before the jam started, and the theme was The Other Side. Now I have to say, I loved this theme. In my opinion, it allows a lot of room for creativity, whilst also acting as a good constraint to make things interesting, like a theme should. Tons of ideas flooded my mind. A game where you have to jump from one side of the screen to the other, like the game VVV, or a puzzle game where your movements are mirrored by a character on the other side of the screen. But one idea stood out, a shooter where you can travel between 2 dimensions where everything is similar but slightly different. This idea was based on the level Effect and Cause in Titanfall 2. Originally, this was going to be a simple shooter, but as I fleshed out my idea more and more, I decided to turn it into more of a puzzle platformer. Alright, so I had my idea and it was time to get started. The first thing I did was import a simple first-person character controller from another project I'm working on, and then we had movement. I figured the next step would be to work a bit on the graphics for my game, as this would help it stand out from others in the jam, as well as help to keep me motivated. This jam was interesting, as it had the extra constraint of having to make your game out of geometric shapes, so I decided to go with this simple Vaporwave Tron style of graphics. To achieve this effect, the first thing I did was create a simple tiling grid texture, which I would use for the floor and walls of rooms. I made the grid section of the texture white so that I could easily tweak the colour in Unity. After that, I made the material emissive, got rid of the skybox, and just gave everything some crazy bloom. And that's basically everything there was to the graphics of the game. The next thing I decided to work on was the dimension shifting mechanic of the game. The first thing I did was create a game manager script that has a boolean to say whether you're in one dimension or the other. Then when the player right clicks, the bool is changed. I then made the colour of the floor and sky change if the bool is true or false to help differentiate between the 2 dimensions. After that, I created an object script that I attached to each object that would be dimension specific. This disables and re-enables an object's main components if they're in the wrong dimension. To give the effect a more oomph factor, I used the lerp function to animate between 2 FOV values when you rift, and it ended up looking pretty cool in my opinion. Alright, so not too long into the game jam, we have our main mechanic, which means we can go and start making some levels. Or we can go procrastinate and watch YouTube, what I like to call research. Whilst doing some research, I came across this video by Steven where he makes his own version of Doom. He showed how he used a very simple technique to create rooms which I can't believe I didn't think of before.
First we'll model the levels in Blender. A few boxes for arena style fights connected by hallways should do the trick. Then we'll just calculate the normal so they face inward and render properly, and then UV map them so the textures all line up.
So I just did the same thing, added on my grid texture, and voila, rooms. One thing I didn't think about is that this method would make wall colliders one way, but I mean, it's a game jam, bugs are fine. Anyway, after that, I created these big doors that block access to rooms unless you rift into another dimension, which just adds a tiny bit of extra challenge to some platforming sections. Once I finished that, I realised that this game still needed some more to it than just this simple mechanic. So I just followed where my creative juices took me and ended up putting this icosphere on a pedestal and just made it spin. I'm still not 100% sure why. Anyway, I was looking at it, I was like, would be cool if you can throw it. Now, you can throw it when you left click and it's fucking cool, but it still doesn't actually do anything. So the next thing I did was make these walls with white edges that will get destroyed. Speaking of that, why don't you go down there and destroy that subscribe button? And whilst you're there, why don't you just press the like button too? Anyway, we want the player to be able to use the ability after they pick up the orb. So I just created a simple interaction system that gives the player a prompt when they're within a certain radius of an interactable object and allows them to interact with it. And now you can pick up the icosphere and throw it. But I feel like this game is missing something at the moment. It's time to add some sound effects. I created some footstep sounds, a landing sound, a rifting sound, and a sound for throwing the icosphere. I made these by just making weird noises into my mic or just tapping random things on my desk. However, I think the game could still do with some music, but I'm not a very musical person and have little to no experience with creating music for games. So luckily, Aikoso himself offered to make some music. Thanks Aikoso. After adding all that into the game, it feels much more alive. Before I started adding in more rooms to the game, I quickly added in a pause menu, which has some sliders which allow you to adjust the game's volume, as well as some buttons to let you leave the game or go to this main menu I created. As a small touch, I added a subtle low pass filter to the music when you pause the game. After that, I added some more platforming challenges and 1 or 2 small puzzles into the game. In the end, the game ended up being pretty short, as in finishable in a few minutes short. But I still think it works pretty well as a proof of concept. The only thing left to do was to submit the game. But first, I gave it to 1 or 2 friends to playtest, and there were a few issues. So the next day, I had a bit of free time and allocated it to fixing the problems I could. The main one was that the sensitivity was way too high or low for people with different hardware, so I added a slider to the pause menu to allow you to adjust it. I of course made sure to mention this right at the top of the game page, so that nobody could miss it, and I wouldn't get tons of comments saying the sensitivity was bad after I submitted the game. Wait. Anyway, if you want to play the game, there'll be a link in the description. As I said, the game has a few, well, many issues, but hopefully, by the time this video is out, the game-breaking ones should be fixed. I also realised after submitting the game that the character controller I made was really bad for platforming, which is not the best for a platformer. But hey, still go and play the game, and let me know what you think. If I get some positive feedback, I might just go and remake the whole thing with some better movement, more rooms, and, less game-breaking bugs. Oh, and if you want to see where I placed in the jam, you can join the Discord as I'll be announcing it there. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've been Retro, and as always, bye.